Hi there, and welcome to another A-Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. And I'm going to give you another update today because, one, my twins are not back from school yet, so I've just got a tiny window. And two, mainly because quite a lot is happening. It's a pretty dynamic situation down in the Kherson area. I also want to add just a couple of things I forgot this morning, genuinely forgot a few things. And also a bit of information on the Bakhmut front. So if I just start with that latter one, I said that not a lot is happening around the Bakhmut area. It turns out that actually there is some counter-attacking going on from the Ukrainians just north of Bakhmut, and maybe possibly in the actual Bakhmut area. It's all a bit dynamic as ever. And I don't know that they've had as much success here because there's a lot better defense setups with regard to what the Russians have compared to other places. And their forces are, just better forces in general. The Wagner PMC, the mercenaries are fairly decent down there. So anyway, there's stuff happening there, and we'll have a look at that in more detail tomorrow. I'm not going to say anything else about up in the Oskil area. So it's really all about Kherson and the sort of actions that are taking place in the northern area, but also the Davidi Breed area here, because quite a lot is happening. So this is where we left it this morning, and I said that Dushani had it was contested. There's a bridge there that had been blown up by the Russians, and there's a fairly flat defensive line. Front line across to this river that comes down here, and we had the Davidi Breed salient. And I was mentioning that Davidi Breed was holding out and had held out for some time. And I mentioned that the 76th Airborne Division. I accidentally said artillery division because I'm not very good with words, as I let you know before. I've got MS and sometimes I get things just plain wrong. So the 76th Airborne Division sent one of their regiments across to help out over here, and it turns out, and I said it could be that this becomes weakened and they get a sort of breakthrough. Well, I don't know if it's connected to that, but it turns out that there has been quite a lot going on along here. And indeed, there are various maps kicking about at the moment. So it's just sort of, it's all happening. People saying that this is happening, that's happening. There is some claim that basically the Ukrainians skirted round this sort of bridge and boggy area around here, skirted around with some mechanized units and are pushing on towards Milove down here. That some Russian analysts are apparently quite scared that the Ukrainians are going to amass a force and cross the Dnipro. And if they cross, they'd need quite a lot of boats or pontoons or bridges to do that. And obviously could be threatened by Russian artillery and air strikes as well. So, it's not saying that's happening, but apparently some Russian analysts are worried about this because this could then weaken Zaporizhzhia. They could be an attack almost from behind the lines of the Ukrainians crossing the Dnipro and going into the Zaporizhzhia sort of front line, and not so much having to deal with Kherson down here, the city, and having to go through the city there to access. So they could do that before that city falls. So there's some interesting ramifications of that. Okay, so there's these movements down here. As I say, plenty of maps going on. So that flat front line is looking like it's getting squeezed from all areas. And here's the Davidi Breed, and it looks like all of these towns along there that were all villages really that were holding out have succumbed to liberation. Succumbed is a negative word, as positive. So North Kherson front, Ukrainian forces liberated the settlements of Davidi Breed, Duchany, which is this one down here, Velika Alexandrivka, and Arkhangelsk and Starosilaya. So those are those four settlements and this fifth one of Ducheny over there. And everywhere in between, these Russians then are potentially looking at getting cut off if they can sort of cut around here, coming from both angles. And there's almost certainly a lot of troops and equipment in this area. Whether the Ukrainians have enough troops and equipment to do that kind of move, because there are a load of troops, Russian troops that is, still in this entire area. So it's not that easy, but what the Ukrainians tend to do is that they use lightly armored, very quick vehicles to get around and prod and prod and probe and probe. And this is what they've done in various different places. And what they're doing around here, I mean, I say I'm not going to talk about this area, but this is what they're doing north of Crimea, which is prod and probe, find out the weakest spot. And when you find the weakest spot, you opportunistically take advantage of that and then pour in more troops, and you force open that crack. And this could well be, almost certainly is what they're doing here, which is finding the weakest spot and forcing it open with more and more troops. Sorry, I'm just flicking maps here. So this is really dynamic, and it's going to be interesting to see how far they go, whether they think they might overstretch themselves, what their tactics are with regard to joining up their forces, if at all. The big worry for the Russians is Novokhovka, which is the dam here, and I think the pumping station that pumps fresh water to Crimea. If they lose that, obviously fresh water to Crimea, that's a massive problem. They don't really want to blow this up. They blow this up and you flood everywhere down there, and Kherson is in trouble. So, but they lose this. You can rebuild the bridges across, and you've got access to the other side without even worrying about Kherson. So this is these two sort of settlements are a real, real worry for the Russians. So it's Berislav there. It doesn't say that in the English transliteration, but that's Berislav, and this is Novokhovka. You'll see them Novokhovka being mentioned an awful lot. So that it is all really happening at the moment. I thought I'd give you a little bit of an update. This was something I meant to say this morning. This is Rob Lee saying a Russian channel gives 3 reasons why the Russian forces are retreating in Kherson. So this is relevant to what I've just been talking about. 1, and this is the Russians saying this, 1, a lack of rotation, exhaustion. He mentions 126th Coastal Defense Brigade. So they're not rotating their troops enough. Then we did hear that they did rotate their troops yesterday or the day before, which, sorry, I'm going to all the wrong... let's go to here. So they did rotate their troops yesterday, a couple of days ago, and this meant that they had a weak force here in the northern Kherson area, and as a result, the Ukrainians took advantage of that and punched through. So on the one hand, they're not rotating, but then when they do, they've rotated in weaker forces, and that could be a further problem for them. Because of a lack of infantry, says the Russian channel, Russian forces stay in strong points in towns. Ukrainian forces push between them. Okay, so there's an awful lot of open ground. You push between those towns, and then those people in the towns feel like they're being encircled, and then they sort of panic and run away. He says Ukraine conducted reconnaissance and found the weak spots in the line. So this is kind of what I was just saying, and that Russia didn't have the mobile reserves to plug the holes. He also says that the weather prevented air support, and neither side used artillery particularly heavily. And thirdly, he says Ukrainian units painted, and this is something I've heard in several places, V and Z markers, V and Z for my American viewers, markers on you're just wrong, on their vehicles, which confuse Russian forces. He suggests this means Ukraine had a C2 tracking system in all of their vehicles. So this is massively important. So I talked about this the other day, about they put V and Z and these markers on their vehicles so they don't get hit by friendly fire. But the Ukrainians are using technology now where they have trackers on all their vehicles. So the command and control know all of the Ukrainian vehicles in a particular field of combat. And what this means is they're not going to accidentally hit them with artillery. They're not going to eat that, so they can paint whatever they like on it. Obviously, visually, this might be confusing to the people around you, but as long as everyone knows what's going on. Problem is the Russians see these vehicles coming towards them with these Russian markings on them, and they're thinking, okay, that's our own guys retreating, and then suddenly they're hit by these guys. So that a good bit of deception. I talked about military deception the other day and how it's a hugely important part of Russian military doctrine, but doesn't feature so explicitly in US and NATO doctrine, but actually should do, because it's a really useful thing to be able to use. So there you go. Other little nuggets. So that's just the update. Let's just add some little nuggets. Aren't necessarily to do with the Kherson front line, but a couple of things I just didn't have time or forgot to talk about this morning. I forgot to do this one since this happened. Right now, this is absolutely fascinating. In that This is an example of the footage taken from the huge rally that went on in Moscow, and it turns out it was massively edited. So all the cheering from the crowds that went along with all the emotive things that the speakers were saying was added in, and here's the proof, and it's pretty fascinating. So here we go with sound.
Я считаю, что и этого недостаточно. Правильно это назвать священная война! Священная война! Достаточно. Правильно это назвать священная война! Священная война! Потому что
absolute silence. The crowd is not cheering at all. And in that first clip you saw, they were cheering really loudly.
Мусульман, тонистами! Бойся! Мы идем! Гойда! Гойда! Сердцами! Сатанистами! Бойся! Мы идем! Гойда!
Гойда!
Гойда! Я считаю, что
That is just brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant, because that is the Russians doing propaganda, shoving out effectively fake videos. Everyone laps them up and thinks, wow, there is great support. So when I watched that, I was like, wow, there are loads of crowds there. Yes, people are going to be bussed in, but it looks like people are actually genuinely supportive of what's being said and what's going on. And they're sort of holding flags and waving them. It turns out that they are just holding flags because they have to. They appear to be bussed in, and there doesn't seem to be widespread support for anything that's being said. That is properly interesting. Okay, little nugget about Svatove. We've talked about this. This is, in my opinion, going to be the next place that's taken. I think Svatove will be liberated within 24, 48 hours. And then my opinion would be to march on to Starobilsk and then consider this encirclement of these settlements down here, if that is possible with the amount of troops that the Ukrainians have. Well, it turns out that Svatove, and I haven't really looked at this before, but is not a very easy place to defend because it's surrounded by bluffs that overlook the city, and it's not a very good place to defend from, because obviously you can just be sitting up here and taking pop shots down there relatively easily. So you might see Svatove fall rather more quickly than one might have otherwise imagined. Okay, another little nugget here. So this is something that happens quite a lot. We've seen in Belgorod cruise missiles firing and then falling on Belgorod themselves as they malfunction. There are poorly maintained pieces of equipment the Russians have plenty of. I talked about S-300s, these surface-to-air missiles being used to attack ground targets. Someone pointed out that they can actually be used to attack ground targets, not their primary function. But that in itself tells you that they just don't have enough quality projectiles and munitions and to fire at ground targets. And so they're being forced to use ones that primarily use as surface-to-air missiles, although they can be used at the ground. And other ones are just falling apart, after they've been shot. So here's one that's just shoots off, and then basically it's a big fireworks display for those hanging around nearby, and that's the end of that munition. I don't know whether it's incandescent or phosphorus munition, or it's just gone off straight away. And I don't know if it was, I did see on this thread somewhere, but it's gone now because I was looking yesterday, of one that basically curled back on itself, 180 degrees, just or 360 degrees, sorry, curled back on itself and shot almost next to where it was shot from. And that's just indicative of the issues that the Russians are having with some of their poorly maintained equipment. Okay, this is Ben Hodges, who's great. He's a really great analyst, sort of former general, on Twitter. So impressed with the Ukrainian General Staff's methodical approach, setting the conditions around Kherson before attacking. Good use of terrain, river, long-range precision fires, all the while fixing these Russian forces so that they can't escape or go help elsewhere. This is a really good point. Just they're tactically and strategically being very clever at the moment, the Ukrainians. And hats off to them. They're doing a really good job. They do a lot of shaping So Kherson in the last couple of weeks was all about shaping what was shaping the battlefield, shaping what was to come, which is hitting things, softening things up, taking your time, taking out key logistics and lines of communication. And once you've done that, then you make your move. And it looks like now they're making a move. So where I was talking about, oh, this is a war of attrition, is a meat grinder, they were biding their time. But then I did also say they are biding their time to waiting till the supplies run out, and then they'll squeeze. But it looks like the squeeze is sort of happening now. Apart from pressing south along the Dnieper River, the Ukrainian army is also advancing to the west from the west, having reached the village of Chkalove. The Russian forces are once again under threat of encirclement, and Ukrainians go for another pincer maneuver, as I was just saying. So that is another little nugget, as another map. And that was talking about sort of crossing the Dnieper River and causing a bit of consternation and worry for the Russians. Okay, two more nuggets. This is a nugget of a Russian attack in the Donbas ended in total fiasco. Several APCs and IFVs, armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles, were destroyed by Ukrainian anti-tank teams. The remnants of the Russian attack forces were fleeing. So, don't need to hear that. So just, pretty much a bunch of destruction. I also want you to, I talked to you the other day about how the landscape has been sort of, it's covered in pockmarks. Just look at that. Look at this landscape. Look at every single one of those as a shell, pretty much, of some variety. It's incredible, the destructive nature of war, obviously. And then they get hit and basically run away. As they get ambushed, try and do a UE, and then they're in trouble. Trying to get out of there, toot sweets, and bish bash bosh. The Ukrainians using, I don't know whether that's Stugna, actually it doesn't look like it, it might be another one. There are plenty of variations on a theme. And then, of course, once you've done the damage there, you can go and drop some, munitions from an off-the-shelf drone on top of people hanging around in trenches. And so there you go. So that's war, and it's pretty crazy. But that is an example of a Russian attack that has not gone very well. Last nugget I want to talk about, something called firms. This is, if you follow a guy called Defmon on Twitter, I've shared a bunch of his stuff. He has done an awful lot of firms data. What is firms and how is it used? This is how NASA is accidentally helping people spy on Putin's war. Okay, and I'll just read a little bit of this. So at first glance, NASA's Fire Information for Resource Management System, FIRMS, website does not look like something that can help track a war. Originally built to help firefighters and other officials keep track of global wildfires, the FIRMS webpage shows something that looks a bit like Google Earth with little red dots scattered across the globe. Each dot represents a fire. NASA's satellites detected with infrared sensors pointed at the Earth's surface. If you move the map to Ukraine, even the most casual observer is able to see that the country is ablaze. A line of fires vaguely correlating with the front line is spread along eastern and southern Ukraine. As it turns out, NASA satellites, in an effort to track wildfires, are inadvertently capturing the fires in the aftermath of shelling, burning munitions depots, and other heat sources from the conflict. For people trying to track the conflict only from public sources, firms can be a lifesaver. Social media coverage of the war in Ukraine is a deluge of claims, counterclaims, unattributed or misattributed footage of fighting, as well as actors pushing their own agendas. The location and effect of air and artillery strikes, such as those by the now famous HIMARS rocket artillery system, is one such information battlefield. So basically, and this is Defmon himself, actually. This is just one of his previous set of tweets. So what happens is you get these pictures, these maps that give you, sorry, just make it, that tell you there's all this fire. And what that tells you is that, okay, are these like pieces of artillery or rocket launchers firing off into the Ukrainian side, or are these receiving? And you can see patterns appearing. So when there started being these counter-offensives going on, just before that, and when the HIMARS were being brought into town, you started seeing loads of fires going on behind the Russian lines. So people in the open source intelligence community, people like you and I, but people who've got even more time on their hands, are studying this data and can say with some kind of confidence that the Ukrainians are doing a really good job of hitting Russians at the moment. How do I know this? Because the firm's data provided by NASA is showing that there are loads of fires going on behind Russian lines, and it's at a ratio of 3-1 with the fires going on behind Ukrainian lines. And what we can tell from that is that the Russians are in trouble because they are getting absolutely mullered by the fire. Now, on the flip side, when Russians were flattening places with artillery, that was also shown by firms. The point is that this is really interesting data that is used then with video and image data that's also coming out, and eyewitness testimony. You start building a picture of exactly what is going on. This is a social media war. This is a war that is being caught on camera on the internet, and we are following it live. And I remember when right at the beginning of the campaign, or much earlier, when there were oil rigs on fire, and even when the Moskva went down. And I did a video on this, so if you go back and check my archives, I did a video saying, isn't it really interesting that the open source intelligence community is telling us that the Moskva has been sunk 8 hours before mainstream media were reporting it? Because they obviously have to do a lot of fact checking to make sure they get everything definitely right and they're not spreading misinformation. The reputable sources do that. But on Twitter, I was like, okay, I've heard the basically the SOS signal of the Moskva in live, right? And I've seen firms data in the middle of the sea to show that something's burning, and so on and so forth. And I've got data, shipping tracking data of these ships going around to check out what's been going on because there's a ship that's sinking and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, right, I know 8 hours before mainstream media have told the world that the Moskva has sunk. And I know that by piecing together all these bits of data. It's just a big puzzle. So the firm's data is a really important component in mapping out the conflict. And many people online use that an awful lot. I mean, I don't myself. I'm just an aggregator of information for you guys, right? So I just go and look at loads of different places and then try and piece together what's going on for the benefit of you all. Anyway, that's all I have to say today. Hope that was really useful for you. Bit of an update and a bit of extra nuggets to warm the cockles of you on this autumn morning or afternoon or evening. Take care. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that kind of stuff, and I'll see you tomorrow.